My name is Margaret Hollis, but everyone in our small coastal town calls me Maggie. I'm 63 years old, and until a few months ago, I thought I'd spend the rest of my life in my late husband's family home, a weathered cedar house perched right on the edge of Willow Bay. It wasn't just a house, it was the heartbeat of my family, the place where my husband taught our son to fish, where we hosted clam bakes every summer, and where the ocean's lullaby tucked me in every night. I believed that no matter how the tides shifted, that house would always be mine. But one crisp autumn morning, my son Nathan walked into my kitchen with his wife Brianna, wearing smiles so polished they could have been rehearsed. In Nathan's hand was a manila envelope. He told me he'd done something wonderful. He said he'd transferred the Bay House into my name, free and clear, just like I'd always wanted. The words should have filled me with joy, but something about the way Brianna's eyes darted toward him, sharp and calculating, made the tea in my cup turn bitter. I'd learned over the years that silence often reveals more than questions. So I smiled, thanked them, and opened the envelope slowly. Inside were papers stamped and notarized, looking every bit as official as they should have. And yet, they felt wrong. I didn't let on. I told them I'd drive out to see the house that very afternoon, maybe take in the sea air, maybe start imagining where I'd hang my favorite paintings. That's when Brianna's smile faltered. She suggested they come with me, insisted really, claiming the coastal roads could be dangerous this time of year. But I told them no, I wanted to see it alone first. They left not long after, Brianna's perfume lingering like an unwelcome guest. As soon as their car disappeared down the road, I grabbed my keys. The drive to Willow Bay had always been a joy, with its winding roads and glimpses of the ocean flashing through the trees. But that day, my hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual. I couldn't shake the weight of suspicion pressing against my ribs. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, my heart stopped. There was a sleek SUV parked in front of my house, and children's toys scattered across the lawn. Smoke curled from the chimney, my chimney, but I hadn't lit that fireplace in months. A woman I'd never seen before answered the door, a toddler balanced on her hip. Her confusion was genuine when I told her this was my house. "We've been renting this place for 9 months, she said, showing me a lease agreement from a property management company I'd never heard of. 9 months. The exact time Nathan had been telling me the transfer freeze was almost complete. I left without causing a scene, but inside, something colder than the autumn wind began to take root. On the drive home, I called Nathan. He sounded cheerful at first, until I told him there was a family living in the Bay House. The pause on the line was long enough to make me wonder if he'd hung up. That was the moment I knew my life was about to change in ways I couldn't yet imagine. I had two choices: accept that the house, and maybe even my trust in my own son, was gone forever, or fight for the truth, no matter how ugly it turned out to be. What I didn't know then was just how deep Brianna's schemes ran. This wasn't just about a stolen house. This was about a web of lies stretching back years, about debts she'd hidden from everyone, and about a plan so calculated that it pulled not only my home into jeopardy, but my relationship with my only child. By the time the truth came out, the Bay House would be the least of what I stood to lose. And the most shocking part, the fight to get it all back would start with a single, unexpected knock on my door, one that would change the course of everything. The drive home from Willow Bay felt longer than it ever had before. The ocean was calm that afternoon, sunlight catching on the waves in a way that should have been beautiful, but all I saw was the reflection of betrayal, rippling over every memory I had of that house. My fingers ached from how tightly I'd been gripping the steering wheel. I kept replaying the woman's words in my head. 9 months, a signed lease, a property management company I'd never heard of. I could still see the way she had shifted her toddler to her other hip, her eyes kind but confused. She hadn't lied to me. She had no reason to. That made the truth even worse, because it meant the lie had come from my own family. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the late afternoon light was fading. I left my bag in the car and walked straight into the kitchen, sitting down at the table like I was anchoring myself against a storm. The manila envelope Nathan had given me was still there, sitting in the same spot where I'd left it, looking innocent and official. I pulled the papers out again, scanning each line slowly, letting the silence of the house wrap around me. Every page had the right stamps, the right seals, the right legal jargon, and yet, I'd learned in life that the more polished something looked, the more you should question it. My late husband used to say, if someone hands you a gift and rushes you to open it, check the strings first. That voice echoed in my head now. I thought about calling Nathan right then, demanding an explanation, but I didn't want to hear his voice, not until I'd sorted through my own thoughts. Instead, I picked up my phone and called a name I hadn't spoken in years, Claire Morrison. She and Jedi had gone to high school together, but she'd moved away and built a career as a real estate attorney. Last I'd heard, she was back in town, handling property disputes for the locals. When she answered, I could hear seagulls in the background. Maggie, it's been forever. What's going on? Her voice was warm, but the urgency in mine cut through any small talk. I told her everything: the envelope, the family living in my house, the lease agreement. By the time I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Maggie, she finally said, this doesn't sound like a transfer gone wrong. It sounds like fraud. Can you bring me the papers tonight? I looked at the clock. It was just after 6. Yes, I said without hesitation. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Claire's office was on the second floor of a renovated brick building in the Old Harbor district. The salty air hit me as I climbed the stairs, and for a moment, I could almost pretend I was just here for a friendly visit. But the weight of the manila envelope in my bag was a reminder that this wasn't social. This was survival. She ushered me into her office, the smell of coffee and sea air mingling. Let's see what we've got, she said, clearing a space on her desk. I slid the papers toward her and watched as she read each one, her brow tightening. The notary stamp is real, she murmured, but something's off about the seal number. And this power of attorney form. Maggie, whose signature is this supposed to be? I leaned forward. Nathan told me it was from the estate lawyer we used when my husband passed. But I've seen his signature. That's not it. Claire set the papers down, her expression sharpening. I've seen this before. Someone's forged these documents, probably with stolen notary materials. If this is what I think it is, the sale might not even be legally valid. The word sale made my stomach drop. You mean they didn't just rent it out? Claire shook her head. I'll need to check county records, but if a property management company is involved, it's likely been sold, probably at a below-market price, for fast cash. Whoever did this knew exactly how to make it look legitimate enough to keep you from asking questions. Her words were like stones in my chest. Nathan said it was in my name. He looked me in the eye and said that. Claire's gaze softened, but her tone stayed firm. Then either he's in on it, or he's been lied to as well. We'll find out which. She made a few calls right there, speaking in that clipped, professional tone I remembered from school debates. Within minutes, she had confirmed what I'd feared. The house had been sold to an LLC registered in another state. The purchase price was suspiciously low, less than 2/3 of what the property was worth. The air in the office felt heavy. My hands trembled in my lap. So it's gone, I said quietly. Claire leaned forward. Not necessarily. If the sale was based on forged documents, it can be challenged. But you need to decide now if you're ready for a legal fight. It's going to be long, messy, and expensive, and it will drag your family into court. I thought about the Bay House, the smell of the ocean drifting through open windows, the sound of gulls at dawn. I thought about my husband's hands guiding mine on the tiller of our old boat, about Nathan as a boy holding up his first catch with pride. I thought about every holiday meal in that dining room, the laughter that had filled it, the love that had lived in its walls. Yes, I said, my voice steady. "I'm ready." Claire nodded, already scribbling notes. "First step is a police report. Then we'll file for an injunction to prevent the LLC from selling the house to someone else. We'll need every piece of documentation you have, financial records, old deeds, anything that proves your ownership before this happened." When I left her office, the sky over the harbor was deep blue, the last light of day fading. I stood at the railing for a moment, watching the boats rock gently against their moorings. Somewhere out there, past the horizon, storms were brewing. But for the first time that day, I felt a flicker of resolve instead of dread. I pulled out my phone, opened my contacts, and hovered over Nathan's name. My thumb trembled over the call button. Not yet. I needed more than his voice. I needed the truth, and I was going to get it no matter how ugly it turned out to be. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The sky outside my bedroom window was still a deep slate gray, the faintest blush of pink just beginning to bleed into the horizon. Normally, I'd make coffee, watch the gulls circle the bay, and let the day come to me. But there was no peace in that morning light, only urgency. I sat at the kitchen table, with a legal pad, listing everything I could remember about the Bay House, the year my husband inherited it, the renovations we did in the late 90s, the summer Nathan broke his arm on the dock. Every detail mattered now. Claire had made that clear. A solid case wasn't built on emotions, it was built on facts, documents, and patterns. The first call I made was to the county clerk's office. The woman who answered sounded distracted until I mentioned the property address. Then her tone sharpened, and she asked me to hold. When she came back, she confirmed what Claire had already discovered. The deed had been transferred 8 months ago to a shell company registered out of state. I asked for the name on the power of attorney. She read it aloud. It wasn't mine. It wasn't Nathan's. But I knew that name. It belonged to a junior loan officer at Seaview Bank, the small local branch where Brianna had once worked part-time before she and Nathan got married. A sour taste spread in my mouth. Seaview Bank had been where my husband and I kept our accounts for decades. The thought that someone from inside could have helped push this through made my skin crawl. I hung up and stared at the phone for a long time. My instinct was to drive straight to the bank and demand answers, but Claire's voice echoed in my head. "Don't tip them off before we have the evidence." Instead, I texted her the name and waited. While I waited, I made another list, this time of every time Nathan had asked me for money since marrying Brianna. The requests had always been couched in care. "It's just to cover a business expense until next month." Or "Brianna's medical bills are piling up and I don't want to worry you." I'd never kept track before. Seeing the numbers lined up now was like a gut punch. Tens of thousands of dollars, most of it in cash withdrawals or checks made out to Nathan personally. The phone rang. It was Claire. "That name you gave me, he's already under investigation for approving fraudulent loans. He was suspended last month. If he's tied to Brianna, that's huge for us." Her voice dropped, as if she knew the next part would hurt. "Maggie, there's something else." I pulled Nathan's credit report. His name is on a joint account with Brianna, an account that received a wire transfer for the exact amount the Bay House sold for. That was 3 days after the sale went through. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "You're saying Nathan knew?" "I'm saying the money passed through an account with his name on it. Whether he knew where it came from, that's what we need to find out." I hung up and stayed perfectly still, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the room. I wanted to believe Nathan was innocent, that Brianna had kept him in the dark, but innocence didn't explain why he'd been standing in my kitchen yesterday morning, handing me forged documents with a smile. By mid-morning, I'd decided I couldn't wait any longer. I called Nathan. He answered on the second ring, his voice guarded. "Mom, I was going to call you today." "Don't bother," I said, keeping my tone flat. "We need to talk, today, without Brianna." He hesitated. "She's not here right now." Good, then I'll be over in an hour. His house was only 15 minutes away, but I drove slower than usual, rehearsing what I would say. The neighborhood was quiet when I arrived, the kind of manicured cul-de-sac where people wave to each other at the mailbox. I knocked once before letting myself in. Nathan still hadn't changed the spare key I'd given him when they bought the place. He was in the kitchen, his hair mussed like he hadn't slept. There were unopened bills stacked on the counter, and the faint smell of stale coffee hung in the air. "What's going on, Mom?" he asked, trying for casual, but his eyes betrayed the tension beneath. I set my bag on the table and took out the envelope he'd given me. "Tell me why there's a family living in my house at Willow Bay." He blinked. "What?" "They've been there 9 months. They have a legal lease. The house was sold to an LLC 3 days before the lease started, and the money from that sale went into a joint account with your name on it." Nathan's face drained of color. He sat down heavily. Brianna said. I cut him off. "No, I want your explanation, Nathan, not hers." He raked a hand through his hair, the way his father used to when he was cornered. "I thought the transfer was legit." Brianna handled the paperwork. She said her old co-worker at the bank could help push it through faster. "She told me the sale was just temporary, that we'd buy it back before you moved in. I didn't know the money was from—" "Stop!" My voice was sharper than I intended. "You didn't know, or you didn't want to know." His eyes flicked away. "I trusted her." "More than you trusted me," I said quietly. The silence between us was thick, filled with all the years I'd believed we were on the same side. When I left his house, the wind off the water had picked up, carrying the smell of salt and rain. In my gut, I knew this was only the beginning. Nathan's choices had tangled him in Brianna's web, whether he'd meant to or not. And if I wanted my home and my peace back, I'd have to be ready to pull every thread until the whole thing unraveled. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with a new text. "Unknown number. We should talk. I have information about Brianna that you need to hear." I didn't recognize the number, but something in me knew this was the next wave in a storm that wasn't close to passing. I stared at the text, my thumb hovering over the screen. The number wasn't in my contacts, but the message felt deliberate, almost urgent. I typed back a single word, "Who?" The reply came almost instantly. "My name is Lucas. I used to know Brianna before she married your son. Can we meet?" I hesitated. Everything about the past 24 hours had been a minefield, and walking into a conversation with a stranger who claimed to have dirt on my daughter-in-law felt risky. Still, my instincts told me not to ignore it. If this man had information, it could be the missing piece Claire needed. We agreed to meet at the Sea Glass Cafe, a small coffee shop 2 towns over where no one would recognize me. I arrived early, choosing a table near the back, away from the windows. The bell above the door jingled exactly at noon, and a tall man in his late 30s stepped inside. He scanned the room, spotted me, and walked over with a cautious smile. "Maggie?" he asked. "Yes." I gestured for him to sit. "You said you knew Brianna." Lucas wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, as if the warmth might steady him. "We dated for about a year. This was before she met Nathan. Back then, she was working at a real estate office in Charleston." I raised an eyebrow. "Charleston." She told us she'd only ever lived here in Willow Bay before marrying Nathan. He gave a humorless laugh. "Yeah, she told me the same thing about a different town. Maggie, I'm going to be blunt. Brianna has a pattern. She targets men with family connections to valuable property. It's not random, it's deliberate." My chest tightened. "You're saying this is what she does?" Lucas nodded. "When we were together, she convinced me to introduce her to my uncle. He owned a vacation home in the Outer Banks. Within months, she was volunteering to help him manage the place. Then, one day, the house was sold. My uncle swore he signed the papers, but later we learned the signatures were forged. She disappeared before the investigation could pin anything on her." A chill ran down my spine. "Did you ever tell anyone?" I tried. The police said there wasn't enough evidence without my uncle pressing charges, and he refused, said it was a family matter. That was her escape hatch, people's reluctance to prosecute their own. I thought about the forged documents Claire had found, the way Brianna's old co-worker at the bank had been implicated. And you think she's doing the same thing to me? I don't think. Maggie, I know. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. A friend of mine still works in real estate, in Charleston. When Brianna married Nathan, she bragged about moving to a small coastal town with an old house in the family. She called it her retirement plan. I felt my hands curl into fists under the table. She said that. Lucas nodded grimly. She's smart, charming, and she always has someone else, usually the husband, deliver the bad news. So she keeps her hands clean. But I can tell you something that might help you. She keeps records, insurance papers, banking info, copies of IDs, all in a small lockbox. She never travels without it. That detail made my pulse quicken. If we could find that, it would prove she's done this before, he finished, and maybe give you leverage in court. By the time I left the cafe, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of an oncoming storm. I drove straight to Claire's office and told her everything Lucas had said. She listened without interrupting, her pen scratching notes across a legal pad. That lockbox could be gold, she said finally, but we can't just take it. We need a warrant, and to get that, we'll need a formal statement from Lucas. Will he do it? I asked. Claire smiled faintly. If he reached out to you, I think he's ready. She made the call while I sat there, my stomach knotting tighter with every minute. Lucas agreed to meet with her the next morning, though, to give his statement. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in my house seemed amplified. The creak of floorboards, the groan of the old heating system. I kept picturing Brianna with that smug smile, thinking she'd pulled it off again. The next day, Lucas signed the statement, and Claire passed it to Detective Paula Green. By that afternoon, the detective called me. Maggie, I'm going to be straight with you, Green said. If we can tie Brianna to another fraudulent property sale, it strengthens our case. But to get that lockbox, we either need her to hand it over voluntarily, or we catch her with it during a lawful search. How do we make that happen? That depends on how willing you are to bait the hook, she said. A heavy pause settled over the line. What are you suggesting? We've been monitoring her movements. She's due to meet with her lawyer tomorrow morning in Seaview. If you request a meeting with her afterward, make it sound like you're willing to talk, she might bring the box for leverage. It was risky. Sitting across from Brianna again, pretending to negotiate, would require every ounce of self-control I had left. But if it got me closer to the truth, I was willing. The following morning, I sat in the corner booth of the Pelican Diner, the smell of frying bacon heavy in the air. At 10:05, Brianna walked in. Her hair was perfect, her coat expensive, and she carried a large leather tote. She slid into the booth across from me, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Maggie, she said smoothly, I wasn't sure you'd agree to meet. I just want to understand, I said, keeping my voice even. If we can resolve this without court. Her hand dipped into the tote, and for a moment, my heart stopped. She pulled out a small metal lockbox, setting it between us on the table like it was nothing. Everything we need to settle this is in here, she said, but you'll have to trust me. I met her gaze, steady. Oh, I trust you, I said softly. I trust you to be exactly who you've always been. Outside, through the diner's window, I caught a glimpse of Detective Green stepping out of an unmarked car. The hook had been set. Brianna's fingers rested lightly on the lockbox, as though it were just another accessory like her designer purse or the diamond studs in her ears. To me, it looked like the kind of object that could decide whether I got my home back or whether she walked away untouched yet again. I forced myself to lean back in the booth, keeping my voice calm. You're saying whatever's in there can make this all go away. Her smile widened, too polished to be genuine. Documents, Maggie, proof that the sale was temporary, bank receipts showing where the money went. We can frame it so it looks like a simple misunderstanding. No need to drag Nathan into it. The way she said Nathan made my skin crawl soft, almost possessive, as if she were reminding me that my son belonged to her, not me. And in return, I asked. Her eyes glittered. You drop the lawyers, no police. We sign a quiet settlement, and you can move back into your precious Bay House by the end of the year. I let out a small, humorless laugh. That's generous of you. Generous, she repeated, as if tasting the word. I'm trying to keep this civil. Maggie, you don't want the media sniffing around. You don't want your friends in town knowing your son's been. She stopped herself, but the damage was done. The threat hung in the air between us. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice. You know, Brianna, for someone who's supposed to be so clever, you make a lot of assumptions about what I'll tolerate. Her brows lifted in mock innocence. And what exactly are you going to do? Before I could answer, a shadow fell across the booth. Detective Paula Green stood there, her badge visible on her belt. Brianna Larson, she asked, her tone leaving no room for pretense. Brianna froze, her eyes darting to me. What is this? I believe you have property that's part of an ongoing fraud investigation. Green said, we have a warrant to seize any and all documents, digital storage devices, or items containing financial records related to the Willow Bay property sale. The color drained from Brianna's face, but she recovered quickly, snapping the lockbox shut and clutching it to her chest. You can't just... Yes, I can. Green interrupted, producing the paperwork and sliding it onto the table. And you're going to hand that over now. For a moment, I thought Brianna might make a scene, but something in Green's eyes, steady, unblinking, must have convinced her otherwise. She slid the box across the table with a clatter. This is harassment. Brianna spat. You're going to regret this, Maggie. I didn't flinch. The only thing I regret is letting you through my front door. Green motioned for an officer by the door to take the box. We'll be in touch, she said to me before escorting Brianna outside. Through the diner's window, I watched as they led her to an unmarked car. She didn't look back. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the empty space. Where the box had been, my coffee had gone cold. The waitress hovered nearby, pretending not to have heard anything, but her eyes were wide. I left a tip big enough to keep her from talking at least for a day. Back in my car, my phone buzzed. A text from Nathan. Brianna just called me from a police car. What's going on? I typed back, ask her. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I tried to read, to cook, to distract myself, but my mind kept drifting to that lockbox. What would Green find inside? Old deeds forged, signatures, bank transfers, or maybe worse, evidence of other families. Brianna had done this too. It was nearly midnight when my phone rang. Detective Green's voice was steady, but charged with a quiet satisfaction. Maggie, we've cataloged the contents of the lockbox. You'll want to sit down for this. I was already sitting, clutching the phone like a lifeline. We found your original deed, the forged power of attorney, and bank records showing the transfer of sale proceeds into that joint account with Nathan's name. But that's not all. There are files, dozens of them, on other properties in different states. Names, addresses, copies of IDs. This is organized, deliberate fraud. I closed my eyes, so it's not just me. Not even close. We've already flagged 3 cases that match the pattern. This could go federal. A long silence stretched between us. Finally, I asked the question I'd been avoiding. What about Nathan? Will he be charged? Green hesitated. That depends. If he can prove he didn't know where the money came from, he might avoid criminal charges. But Maggie, there are texts between him and Brianna discussing the sale. They're vague, but they don't look great. My stomach knotted. I need to see them. We'll arrange that, Green said. For now, get some rest. This is going to move fast. Rest was impossible. I spent the night pacing my living room, the sound of the waves outside a constant reminder of what was at stake. By morning, the sun was rising over Willow Bay, casting golden light across my kitchen table, the same table where Nathan had handed me the envelope of lies. At 9 sharp, Green arrived with a manila folder. Inside were printed screenshots of text exchanges between Nathan and Brianna. Most were mundane, talking about bills, dinner plans, but a few stood out. Brianna, once it's in her name, we can flip it back later. She'll never know. Nathan, are you sure this is legal? Brianna, trust me, just sign where I tell you it. The words blurred as I read them. My son hadn't planned this, but he hadn't stopped it either. I set the papers down and looked out at the bay. The tide was coming in, the water creeping higher up the shore. There was no turning it back. That afternoon, Green called again. Brianna's being arraigned tomorrow. The DA wants you there. And Maggie, they're going to offer her a deal in exchange for information on the others involved. What kind of deal? Asked. Reduced sentence, but only if she hands over everything and testifies. The thought of her walking away with anything less than the maximum punishment made my jaw tighten. But if it meant ending this for good, not just for me, but for every other name in that box, maybe it was worth it. As I hung up, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Nathan. Mom, please, can we talk before tomorrow? I need you to hear me out. I stared at the screen, my reflection faint in the glass. For the first time in weeks, I didn't know if I wanted to hear my son's voice or if I could handle what he might say. I didn't reply to Nathan's text right away. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time, watching the screen dim and go black. Outside, the wind had shifted, carrying the tang of the sea deeper into the house. It felt like a storm was building not in the sky, but in my own chest. By 7 o'clock that evening, I decided I couldn't face another sleepless night with unanswered questions clawing at me. I called him. He picked up on the first ring. Mom, he breathed, as if he'd been holding the word back for days. Come by, I said simply, but leave Brianna out of it. When he arrived half an hour later, I barely recognized him. His shoulders slumped, his eyes shadowed. The confident, joking man I'd raised was gone, replaced by someone carrying the weight of choices he couldn't undo. He stood in the doorway, hesitant, until I stepped aside. We sat in the living room, the gulf between us as real as the coffee table separating our chairs. I need to know exactly what you knew, Nathan. No more vague explanations, no more hiding behind what Brianna told you. He rubbed his hands over his face. I knew she was pushing the sale. I didn't know it was forged paperwork until last week. That's not true, I said quietly, sliding the folder Green had given me across the table. You asked if it was legal. She told you to trust her. You signed anyway. He flinched as he read the printouts. I thought she'd found some loophole, something to make the transfer faster. I didn't think. His voice trailed off, breaking. I didn't think she'd take everything. The anger I'd been holding back rose in my throat, but I swallowed it down. You didn't think because it was easier not to. You've been protecting her for years, Nathan, even when it cost you your integrity, and now it's cost both of us our home. His eyes filled, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who ran down the dock barefoot, laughing in the salt air. I'm sorry, Mom. I swear I never meant to hurt you. I believe you, I said, my voice soft but firm. But believing you doesn't erase what happened. Tomorrow, you'll see Kfie, you'll see her in court, and you'll hear every detail of what she's done, not just to me, but to others. You need to decide which side you're on. He looked down at his hands. I already have. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't trust myself to hear it without letting hope slip back in. And hope was dangerous right now. We ended the conversation there. not with a hug, but with a silent understanding that nothing between us would ever be the same. The next morning, I arrived at the courthouse early. Claire was already there, pacing near the entrance with her briefcase. "The DA's going to push hard for a deal," she told me. "But remember, you have a voice here. If you want to oppose it, you can." Inside, the courtroom was colder than I remembered from my last visit, the overhead lights casting a sterile glow on the wood paneling. Nathan was seated at the back, his expression unreadable. Brianna was brought in a few minutes later, wearing the same carefully composed mask I'd seen so many times before. Even in custody, she carried herself like she was in control. The judge entered, and the DA laid out the plea agreement, reduced sentence, in exchange for full cooperation, the return of my property, and restitution payments. Hearing it spoken aloud made it feel more real, but also more bitter. When the judge invited me to speak, I rose slowly. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. "This is not just about a house. This is about a calculated betrayal that took advantage of family trust and community goodwill. If this deal ensures that no one else falls victim to her, I will accept it. But make no mistake, what she did cannot be undone." Brianna's gaze locked on mine, her eyes narrowing, but I didn't look away. The judge nodded, making notes. "The court accepts the plea. Sentencing will reflect the agreement, with strict conditions on cooperation." As the gavel came down, a strange calm settled over me. This chapter of the fight was over, but the cost had been steep. My relationship with Nathan was a fractured thing now, fragile and uncertain. The Bay House would return to me, but the innocence of what it had once represented was gone. After court, I stepped outside into the pale winter sun. Nathan approached, his voice low. "Thank you for not pushing for the maximum." "I didn't do it for her," I said. "I did it because justice isn't about vengeance. It's about ending the harm." He nodded, but the weight in his eyes told me he understood exactly what I hadn't said. Ending the harm didn't mean forgiving the people who caused it. That night, back at my temporary rental, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window. Out there, beyond the dark streets, the bay was waiting. I was closer to home than I'd been in months, but still far enough to feel the ache. The storm had passed in the courtroom, but the tide between my son and me was still unpredictable. Tomorrow, I'd start planning the move back. Tonight, I'd let myself rest, knowing that in the morning, the fight for my future would begin in a different way, one that had nothing to do with lawyers or judges, and everything to do with rebuilding what Brianna had tried to destroy. The day I got the keys back to the Bay House, the sky was a perfect, endless blue, the kind of day when the water looked like glass, reflecting every drifting cloud and passing gull. Claire met me in front of the courthouse, handing me an envelope with the deed inside. "It's yours again," she said simply. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in. It didn't feel triumphant, not exactly, more like relief, deep and quiet. The kind you don't notice until you realize you've been holding your breath for months. I thanked her, but my eyes kept drifting to the paper in my hands, as though it might vanish if I looked away. The drive to Willow Bay felt different this time. The roads I knew by heart seemed sharper in detail, the whitecaps breaking along the rocks, the shimmer of sunlight on wet sand, the slow sway of the marsh grass in the wind. Every mile brought me closer to the place Brianna had tried to take from me, and every mile made it harder to believe I was actually going back. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, the house stood exactly as I remembered. The cedar siding was a little more weathered, the windows reflecting the late afternoon sun. The young family who had rented it was long gone. They'd left behind a welcome note, wishing me peace and joy in my home. It was taped to the front door in neat handwriting, a small kindness that made my throat tighten. Inside, the air smelled faintly of salt and lemon polish. The floors gleamed. Furniture sat exactly where it belonged. But there was something else, an emptiness that wasn't physical. The house had been lived in, but not loved. I walked from room to room, my footsteps echoing softly. The kitchen, where I'd taught Nathan to shuck oysters. The living room, where my husband and I had played cards on rainy nights. The dock out back, stretching into the bay like a handshake to the horizon. Every space felt both familiar and foreign, as though the memories were waiting for me to reclaim them. In the upstairs bedroom, I noticed a faint outline on the floor where a rug had once been. Something made me kneel down and run my hand along the boards. One plank felt looser than the others. I pulled it up, and there it was. A small metal cash box, dusty and cold to the touch. My heartbeat quickened. It was different from the lockbox the police had seized. This one had no label, no key. I carried it downstairs and found a screwdriver in the kitchen drawer. The lock popped open with a satisfying click. Inside were stacks of papers, envelopes stuffed with receipts, and a small bundle of $100 bills bound with a rubber band. But what made my stomach drop was the folder at the bottom, marked with names and addresses I didn't recognize. Copies of driver's licenses, property deeds, bank statements, all in the same organized, predatory format I'd seen in the other box. Brianna had been using my house as storage for her schemes. I called Detective Green immediately. She arrived within the hour, her expression hardening as she flipped through the contents. This is going to add years to her sentence, she said, and it might help some of her other victims finally get closure. I stood on the porch while Green cataloged the evidence, watching the sun dip toward the water. The gulls were calling, the tide was coming in, and the smell of the sea wrapped around me like an old friend. After Green left, I stayed outside, sitting on the steps with a blanket draped over my shoulders. I could see the lights of fishing boats in the distance, bobbing gently against the waves. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about court dates or forged signatures. I was thinking about the future. That night, I slept in my own bed for the first time in almost a year. The mattress was the same, the creak of the old frame still there, the sound of the waves through the open window like a lullaby I'd been missing. I dreamt of nothing. The next morning, I brewed coffee in my kitchen, sunlight spilling across the counter. I made toast, sat at the table, and simply existed. No phone calls, no lawyers, no lies. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. Nathan. Just his name on the screen. No message. I stared at it for a long moment before swiping to answer. Sorry. Hi, Mom. I didn't respond right away. The sound of his voice was enough to stir the ache that had been sitting under my ribs. I heard you're back in the house, he said. That's good. Yes, I said softly. It is. Silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we weren't saying. Finally, he spoke again. I don't expect you to forgive me. I hope someday you can believe that I never wanted this to happen. I closed my eyes. I believe you didn't want it, but you let it happen anyway. And that's the part I can't forget. He exhaled, the sound heavy. I'll leave you alone. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. When the call ended, I set the phone down and went to stand at the back door. The bay was glittering in the midday sun, the dock stretching out like a promise. I knew then that my peace didn't depend on Nathan's words, or even his regret. It depended on me. And I was ready to protect it no matter what. 2 weeks passed before I saw Nathan again. It wasn't planned. I was at the Willow Bay Farmers Market, filling a basket with oysters and fresh herbs. When I spotted him across the row of stalls, he looked thinner, older somehow, as if the weight of the past months had pressed the youth out of him. For a moment, we just stood there, two strangers connected by blood and a long trail of bad decisions. He was the one to bridge the distance. Mom, he said, his voice almost tentative. Can we talk, just for a minute? I hesitated. The crowd around us moved in slow waves, the scent of salt air mixing with fresh bread and coffee. Finally, I nodded toward a quieter corner by the harbor. We stood near the railing, the sound of gulls crying overhead, and waited for one of us to break the silence. "I'm leaving town," he said. "I got a job offer in Maine. It's a clean slate. No one knows me there." A part of me felt a flicker of relief. Another part ached with the finality of it. "If that's what you need to do, then go," I said, "but understand something, Nathan. You don't get to run from what happened here. You carry it with you until you face it." He nodded, his eyes fixed on the water. "I know. I can't be here, Mom. Everywhere I look, I see what I lost, what I took for granted." I wanted to tell him I saw it too. That every room in the Bay House was a reminder not just of what Brianna tried to steal, but of the years I'd spent trusting his judgment. But I didn't. Some truths had to be learned in silence. When we parted, there was no hug, no promise to call, just a mutual understanding that we were giving each other space that might never close. I watched him walk away, his figure growing smaller against the bright morning sky. That afternoon, I poured my energy into reclaiming the house. I scrubbed floors, polished the old cedar railings, and hung back the curtains I'd kept in storage. Every task was an act of taking back what was mine, not just the property, but my sense of ownership over my own life. One evening, as I was sorting through a box of old photographs, I found one that stopped me cold. Nathan, maybe 7 years old, standing barefoot on the dock with his first fishing pole. My late husband's hand rested lightly on his shoulder, both of them smiling into the camera. It was the kind of moment that felt untouchable back then, impossible to imagine breaking. I slipped the photo into a frame and placed it on the mantel, not as a reminder of what I'd lost, but as proof of what I'd once had and might one day find again, in some form. Detective Green called a few days later with an update. "The second lockbox you found has linked Brianna to 5 more property fraud cases," she said. "3 victims are elderly family members, 2 are former employers. The DA is pursuing additional charges, and federal investigators are involved now." I closed my eyes, letting the information settle. "How long will she serve?" "Hard to say," Green replied. "But with the new charges, she could be looking at over a decade, maybe more." It should have felt like closure. In a way, it did. But justice, I was learning, was never clean. It was a slow, grinding process that gave you back pieces of what you'd lost, but never the whole thing. On the first warm day of early spring, I took my coffee down to the dock. The bay shimmered in the sunlight, and the air was thick with the smell of salt and pine. I sat there for years thinking about the months that had brought me here, the lies, the courtrooms, the long quiet nights where I doubted my own strength. And now, the quiet wasn't heavy anymore, it was mine. I'd drawn the final line not just with Brianna, but with Nathan. I'd chosen my peace over my need to fix what was broken between us. That didn't mean I stopped loving him. It meant I loved myself enough to stop letting that love be used against me. The tide was high when I finally stood and walked back toward the house. The cedar siding caught the sunlight, glowing warm and golden, as if welcoming me home all over again. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and sea breeze, a scent that belonged only here. Whatever came next, whether Nathan reached out someday, whether Brianna spent 10 years behind bars or 20, I knew this: the house, the bay, and my life were mine again, and I wasn't going to let anyone take them from me. Standing on the deck that evening, watching the sun sink low over Willow Bay, I realized something important. The house was never just wood and stone. It was a part of me, my history, my resilience, my proof that I could survive the kind of betrayal that rips through more than just bank accounts. I'd fought for it, but more than that, I'd fought for myself, for the right to trust my own instincts again, for the peace of knowing I didn't have to let people, no matter how close, chip away at my boundaries in the name of love. The bay stretched out before me, endless and steady, A reminder that some things endure, no matter how hard the tide tries to pull them away. I didn't know if Nathan would ever truly come back into my life. And I'd made peace with that. What mattered was that I came back to myself. If you've ever been through something like this, you know it's not just about the thing you lost, it's about who you become when you fight to get it back. And maybe, just maybe, the real victory isn't revenge at all, it's freedom. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. Have you ever had to set boundaries with someone you love, even when it hurt? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one.